This is Max Travardin, student number TRE 1600 3622, and this is my presentation on arousal in sport. What is arousal? Arousal is the physiological and psychological state of being awoken or of sense organs stimulated to a point of perception. Concentration and attention span. Concentration and attention span are affected differently at different levels of arousal. A high level of arousal, the concentration and attention span will be negatively affected and they will decline. The athlete will have a lower concentration and will be more likely to perform worse, and their attention span will be narrower, meaning they will be less aware of things going on around them. For example, in a game of football, if you have low concentration and your attention span is narrower, then you're more likely to give away a free kick as you may be offside, but you may not realise as your concentration and attention span is low. This has a negative effect on performance because it means that you're more likely to make a mistake and therefore putting your team at risk of conceding. On the other hand, at low levels of arousal, you're more likely to be more concentrated and your attention span will be broader. This means that they will be more aware of the game and therefore they know exactly what they are doing and are concentrated on executing it. This would be best in a game of darts, where you require low levels of arousal, as you need to keep your concentration focused on the game and not be affected by the crowd. The impact of low levels of arousal on a game of rugby is negative because it would mean that you have high levels of concentration and attention span, meaning that you would be more aware of the game going on around you. The low arousal levels mean that there won't be as much adrenaline kicking in, and therefore you will be more reluctant to get involved in the game and make tackles. Also, low levels of arousal would have a negative effect on weightlifting, because you don't need high amounts of concentration and attention span. You just need to lift the highest weight, which requires a lot of adrenaline and therefore high arousal levels in order to do it. Drive theory. This theory states, as your arousal increases in sport, your performance increases at the same rate, meaning that the more aroused you are, the better you'll perform. This theory works for performers that use power in their sports, for example weightlifting, as the more pumped up and more adrenaline they have, the higher the weight they'll be able to lift. However, this theory doesn't always work, as for sports where you need high amounts of concentration, arousal is not needed and therefore it doesn't increase the performance. For example, in archery, if you're trying to shoot an arrow into the centre of the target and you're aroused, and then adrenaline will make your heart beat faster, which in turn will make you ventilate more and shake, which means you won't have a steady hand affecting the performance. This means that this theory isn't very valid, as it states that whenever arousal increases, performance increases along with it, but that isn't always the case. This means that drive theory states that your optimum level of performance is when you have reached your optimal level of arousal, which isn't true, as if you become too over-aroused and your performance will decrease. Inverted U hypothesis. This theory is called the inverted U theory due to the shape of the curve being that shape on the graph. This shows that performance increases with arousal because the line increases, but then it levels off as you hit an optimum level of arousal. After this, you are too aroused and therefore your performance will start to decrease. A sporting example of this could be in rugby, where you need to reach a high level of arousal in order to be pumped up and not be afraid of any tackles. However, if this arousal gets too high, then you'll be too psyched up for the game. This will result in poor decision making, which could lead to a late tackle, or you could be too involved in getting the ball back and handle it in the ruck, which could lead to a yellow card, and therefore you put your team down to 14 men for 10 minutes, in which time the opposing team could score and the game could be flipped on its head. The optimum level of arousal and level of performance will be reached at different times for different sports. For example, in the picture, it shows a complex task and a simple task, and when optimum arousal and performance is reached. The optimum arousal required for high performance in the complex task is reached lower than the simple task. This complex task could be archery. This requires a lower arousal to be at this optimum level, as you need to be relaxed and calm and have very high amounts of concentration and attention span, as you need to get an arrow into a target as small as the bullseye, which takes a lot of concentration. The simple task could stand for weightlifting, as it is a reasonably straightforward approach to what you need to do. It's as simple that as a weightlifter you need to lift the highest weight in order to win. The hard part about it is lifting the highest weight. In order for this to happen, you need to have very high levels of arousal, as concentration isn't needed. You just need to have a lot of adrenaline in order to be psyched up to lift very heavy weights. This means that the higher your arousal is, the better you'll perform, which is why the optimum level of arousal for the simple task is a lot higher, as concentration isn't needed in it. This theory is more valid as it takes into account how an increase in arousal does increase performance, but if it goes too far, then it will cause performance to decline. Also, it takes into consideration how different sports require different optimum levels of arousal, whereas the drive theory just takes into account that our performances will increase in all sports when you are more aroused. Catastrophe theory. This theory states that once you're over-aroused, you'll reach a catastrophe, meaning that your performance drastically declines. From this, you'll either have a recovery, where you return to normal arousal levels and you start again from there, or you continue to decline in performance. Once you reach your optimum level of performance, you will find that cognitive and somatic anxiety are high, which will cause a catastrophe and a decline in performance. After this, you reach a stage where you can react in two different ways. Either high levels of arousal can continue and you carry on performing badly and it doesn't stop, or you can regain control of the anxiety and the arousal levels, and you can return to building the arousal levels up again to reach optimum level once again. A sporting example of this is where you're playing a game of cricket and you're batting. Whilst you're batting, your arousal levels are too high and you begin to lose concentration and focus on just trying to generate as much power as possible and hit the ball as far as you can. Added on to this, the opposition fielders are talking about all the balls you're missing, which makes your anxiety high, and then the catastrophe happens. At this point, you can either take a minute out to compose yourself whilst the ball is being delivered back to the bowler and then regain concentration, or you can carry on the way you are with increasing the arousal, causing the performance to carry on decreasing until you are out. Elite athletes tend to be better at reaching the recovery stage as they have had more experience, and therefore they know what to do if they reach the catastrophe stage. However, the non-elite athletes are more likely to have their arousal increased, and then their performance will keep deteriorating, and they won't reach the recovery stage because causing them to get back on track and perform well again.